team in particular, it is the Fiesta Bowl. It is a New Year's Six matchup. And so, Nick, in particular, you've commented that, it's a good place to be if you can't get to the playoff. It is the place to be. But Oklahoma State in particular doesn't, I don't want to knock on the Cowboys here because we cover all of college football, and I may have some folks watching that like Oklahoma State, but it doesn't generally excite college football nation with Oklahoma State being the other, for people that aren't just interested in watching the football that's played for those 3.5 hours, but some kind of a brand name matchup.
Yeah, it's not necessarily like if you look at those helmet games. I'm looking behind your head there, Mark, and I see the Alabama one. I see a Tennessee one sticking out. I see a Notre Dame one. Like, throw some of those teams together. Just look at the helmet. It's a big time game. Is that so much what you think when you think Oklahoma State? They definitely have had their history. I mean, it's have a couple. I mean, good luck finding any program that had the back-to-back running backs quite like they did there in the late '80s with Barry Sanders into Thurman Thomas, quarterback Mike Gundy for those teams, by the way. But yeah, it's not necessarily like you look at the Big 12, Oklahoma, Texas draws the attention, not necessarily Oklahoma State always nationally. That's not to say it's not a knock on Oklahoma State here. Oklahoma State is a lot of the old parts that you look at with this Big 12 of, okay, just score 60 points and whoever is the first to 60 is going to win. Them and Baylor have kind of been the teams that have been ahead of this turn a bit of, all right, we're going to focus on the defense. We're going to focus on innovating things, changing things up, and shutting you down, keeping you from scoring. And we'll figure out points on our own eventually. But as long as we keep you from scoring, then we have a great chance to win. And that's kind of how they've gone about this. And it's going to be as good a defense as Notre Dame faces all year long in this Fiesta Bowl.
Yeah, Oklahoma State kind of reminds me of Texas A&M in the SEC, and look what Texas A&M did this year on the recruiting trail. I don't want to say they're necessarily like a sleeping giant per se, but I do think that they're a program that is sort of on the rise. Mike Gundy, I think, has been up for some other big-time jobs. There were even rumors that he was possibly up for some big-time jobs this year and almost left. So I think that's especially now with Texas and Oklahoma leaving the Big 12. I mean, Oklahoma State could, and Baylor, like you mentioned, Nick, could sort of run that conference for a long time. I mean, Cincinnati coming in, I think will help it as well. And they'll probably be a really good Power 5 program, especially if someone like Luke Fickell kind of sticks around for a couple more years. The other, I think, intriguing part about this, at least from a Notre Dame fan standpoint, is Notre Dame's never played Oklahoma State. They've pretty much played everybody, at least that you can think of. And this is certainly one of those, quote unquote, bigger name programs that they have not played. So I think that's intriguing. And I think for college football fans like yourself, Mark, that's something that they could look to. It's just, you've never seen it before. So that certainly brings some intrigue as well.
Yeah. And it's just not, you look at the Big 12 as it's currently constructed. It's just not a conference Notre Dame has a whole lot of history with. You look back to the roots of Notre Dame and what made Notre Dame into a national power. There's ties to what's the Pac-12 now, obviously, with the early days of Stanford and USC. Now the Stanford rivalry went on hold for a long time, but started back in the late 90s, early 2000s, and there's that huge part of it. Obviously, the Notre Dame and the Big Ten, those stories are well documented of trying to get into the conference for years and years, and the rivalries with Michigan, Michigan State, Purdue, and interstate there. The SEC, maybe it doesn't run quite as deep historically, but you look at the Big 12, and there's been some meetings with Notre Dame and Texas, say, in bowl games. There's been a couple of home and home series with Texas and Oklahoma here or there, but really there just is no real history with Notre Dame and deep in the Big 12, at least as it's currently constructed. And you kind of look at that and say, all right, this is unique. This is different. Because when Notre Dame's gone out there before, all right, once they played Colorado, once they've played Oregon State out of the Pac-12 and that blowout, that route that Chad Johnson and TJ Houshmandzadeh and company put on Notre Dame in 2000. And then they've played Ohio State a couple of times. So it's really just, you look at that and it's a chance to see something a bit different in a different kind of form of football and a different conference of football that Notre Dame fans don't get to see a whole heck of a lot of.
Yeah, those Colorado matchups in the late 80s into 1990 were monumental. And, of course, the Buffs have moved on to the Pac-12. There was a series with Texas that you guys could document pretty well, about 7 or 8 years ago, that were exciting in regards to, again, a couple national brands getting together. The games were exciting. The one at Texas, at Austin in particular, that people got excited about. early in the season, and then the teams didn't. Texas, in particular, did not turn out to be much of a team when it was all said and done. So it was a lot of hype for not much payoff at the end of the year. And of course, Notre Dame won a national championship when they beat Texas and Earl Campbell in the Cotton Bowl in 1977. And I can't think of too many Notre Dame Oklahoma matchups through the years.
2012 is kind of like the biggest one of recent memory, when that kind of catapulted Notre Dame to face Alabama in the championship game. And what was
30
it, like
to 13 comes to mind?
Yeah, 31-13, I think it was what it was. It was close throughout, and then kind of Notre Dame took off in like the fourth quarter.
And then really Terry Hanratty, when he took over for Frank Leahy, his high point was beating Oklahoma and ending their streak in what was 1950, sometime in the 50s, very early on. And other than that, yeah, you're right, Mark. There's not a whole lot there of depth to a history with any of those.
Yeah, and I don't even think there's anything on the horizon. Just looking at their future schedules, I mean, they have some, some stuff with the SEC, home and home with Texas A&M, Alabama coming up. Obviously, with their ACC ties now, I mean, they're going to play Clemson, Florida State, Miami on a consistent basis, but nothing really with the Big 12. So it really comes down to. I'm assuming they'll probably keep some sort of history now with Cincinnati. I don't even mean this in a negative way, but it seems like every Cincinnati coach that's any good comes to Notre Dame and over the in the coming years. And I think they might even snag a few more, or at least one more possibly, after the Fiesta Bowl and the college football playoff. I mean, there's certainly some holes on Notre Dame's coaching staff right now that Cincinnati could fill. And there's been some rumors around that. So, and with Cincinnati going to the Big 12, I could see that being some, a program they try to, keep involved with now that they sort of have like a rivalry of sorts.
True. Michael is saying the playoff should have been Baylor, Cincinnati, Michigan, and Notre Dame. I think Michael's possibly leaving out a conference. I don't know which one that is, but
probably purposely.
Yeah. I think that's a point there from Michael taking a dig.